In the summer of 2024, something unprecedented happened in Dallas-Fort Worth. Within 3 months, 14 megachurch pastors resigned, were fired, or were arrested. 14 leaders who collectively preached to over 50,000 people every Sunday. 14 men who built empires on their charisma and now watched those empires crumble in real time. Gateway Church's Robert Morris resigned after admitting to inappropriate sexual behavior with a 12-year-old girl in the 1980s. Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship's Tony Evans stepped down after admitting to an undisclosed sin. Cross Timbers Church's Josiah Anthony resigned for actions that were inappropriate and hurtful to church staff. And these weren't fringe churches or struggling ministries. These were megachurches, multi-million-dollar operations with professional staff, state-of-the-art facilities, and television broadcasts reaching millions. One local pastor who spoke to reporters said something that should make every Christian pay attention. "It feels like an avalanche. It's strangely localized and time-bound. I don't know how to account for that." But here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. This isn't localized and it's not temporary. What's happening in Dallas is happening everywhere. The megachurch model that defined American evangelicalism for 40 years is collapsing. The era of celebrity pastors and big-stage Christianity is ending. And most Christians have no idea how much is about to change. This is bigger than anyone realizes. This is the death of the megachurch. And what comes after will look nothing like what came before. Today, we're investigating the collapse of the megachurch movement and the end of the celebrity pastor era. This isn't about one denomination or one scandal. This is about the systematic failure of a model that promised to save American Christianity but instead created the conditions for its spectacular unraveling. The megachurch boom began in the 1980s and exploded in the 1990s and 2000s. Pastors like Bill Hybels at Willow Creek, Rick Warren at Saddleback, Andy Stanley at North Point, and Joel Osteen at Lakewood built churches of unprecedented size using business principles, professional marketing, and charismatic leadership. By 2024, there were over 1,750 Protestant megachurches in America, churches with 2,000 or more weekly attenders. They represented less than 1% of all churches but accounted for over 5 million weekly worshipers. But in the past 5 years, the model has begun imploding from within. Hillsong collapsed after founder Brian Houston resigned amid scandal. Mars Hill shut down after Mark Driscoll's abusive leadership was exposed. Harvest Bible Chapel fired James McDonald. Willow Creek's Bill Hybels resigned in disgrace. And 2024 became the year when the cascade of megachurch failures reached critical mass. When pastors resigned at rates never seen before. When the scandals became so frequent they stopped being shocking. This investigation will reveal what caused the megachurch model to fail, why celebrity pastors keep falling, and what this means for the future of American Christianity. Because what's dying isn't just individual churches. It's an entire vision of what it means to be the church. It's a model that centralized power, prioritized growth over health, and created celebrities when Jesus called for servants. And the question we need to ask isn't whether megachurches will survive. The question is whether Christianity will be better off when they're gone. The megachurch movement emerged from the church growth movement of the 1970s, which applied business and marketing principles to church ministry. Church growth theorist Donald McGavran argued churches should focus on reaching specific demographic groups. Peter Wagner taught that pastoral leadership should mirror corporate CEO models. The idea was simple. If you build it right and market it well, they will come. The first modern megachurch was Garden Grove Community Church in California, led by Robert Schuller. His Crystal Cathedral seated nearly 3,000 and pioneered the televised worship service. Schuller preached possibility thinking and positive confession, a prosperity light message that appealed to upwardly mobile Americans. By the 1980s, the model was replicating across the country. Bill Hybels started Willow Creek Community Church in suburban Chicago, pioneering the seeker-sensitive approach. Hybels studied what kept unchurched people from attending and redesigned everything to remove barriers. No religious jargon, contemporary music, practical sermons, professional production. Rick Warren took similar principles to start Saddleback Church in California, eventually writing The Purpose-Driven Church, which became the blueprint for thousands of pastors trying to grow their churches. The 1990s saw the megachurch boom accelerate. T.D. Jakes in Dallas, Joel Osteen in Houston, Craig Groeschel with Life Church. These weren't just pastors, they were brands. They wrote best-selling books, toured nationally, appeared on television, and built multi-million-dollar church campuses. The model worked, at least by the metrics that mattered then: attendance, baptisms, budgets. Megachurches grew while mainline denominations declined, and many saw this as evidence that God was blessing this approach. But beneath the surface, problems were emerging that would eventually bring the whole system down. The summer of 2024 in Dallas-Fort Worth became the defining moment that revealed what had been building for years. At least 14 pastors from mostly megachurches resigned or were fired between May and September, or were arrested on sex-related charges. Others were removed for vague moral failures that churches refused to specify. Robert Morris, founder of Gateway Church, one of America's largest megachurches with over 100,000 active attenders, resigned in June after Cindy Clemisher publicly accused him of sexually abusing her for 4.5 years beginning when she was 12. Morris had been a spiritual advisor to former President Donald Trump. He was worth tens of millions. He preached to thousands every Sunday and millions more on television. And he had allegedly molested a child while in ministry, been confronted about it, and continued building his empire. An internal investigation later revealed that multiple Gateway staff and elders knew about the abuse for years and failed to report it. 4 elders were removed after the investigation. Morris's wife and son resigned. The empire crumbled in weeks. Tony Evans, one of the most respected voices in Black evangelicalism and founder of Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, resigned after admitting to an unspecified sin. Evans had been in ministry for nearly 50 years. He said he committed no crime but failed to use righteous judgment. To this day, no one knows what he did. Josiah Anthony at Cross Timbers Church resigned after elders discovered a pattern of inappropriate communication, sometimes sexual, with women in the church and on staff. His interim replacement, Byron Copeland, resigned weeks later after his own history of misconduct at Gateway Church surfaced. Stonebriar Community Church fired Tony Camerota, an associate pastor of 17 years, for an undisclosed moral failure. North Dallas Community Bible Fellowship's Taryn Dames was arrested for soliciting a prostitute. Lakeside Baptist Church's Luke Cunningham was arrested for sexually assaulting a child. The pattern was undeniable. Megachurch pastors were falling at rates unprecedented in modern American Christianity. But Dallas wasn't unique. Similar scandals were unfolding nationally. David Platt faced questions about financial transparency and racial issues at McLean Bible Church. Eastview Christian Church in Illinois underwent an investigation revealing toxic workplace culture under founding pastor Mike Baker. The institutional response revealed a deeper problem than individual moral failure. Churches used vague language like moral failure that stifled conversation. They protected institutions over victims. They allowed powerful pastors to resign quietly and often start new churches elsewhere with no accountability. Michelle Simpson-Tuggle, a victims' rights attorney in Dallas, identified the structural problem. In institutions like megachurches where profits can be at stake, there's an incentive not to be seen in a negative light. Just because of the sheer number of people and the profit and money involved, it's easier for an abuser to continue and hurt more people in a megachurch. The megachurch model had created perfect conditions for abuse. Celebrity pastors accountable to no one, cultures of secrecy, financial incentives to protect the brand, and theological frameworks that elevated leaders as God's anointed beyond questioning. Let me show you the structural mechanisms that created this crisis, because understanding the system is essential to understanding why individual moral failures became systemic catastrophes. First, the centralization of power. Megachurches typically operate with governance structures that give senior pastors unprecedented authority. Unlike denominational structures with external oversight, many megachurches function as pastor-led entities where elders serve more as advisors than as checks on pastoral power. When Robert Morris was confronted about abuse in the 1980s, He confessed to church leaders who essentially gave him a timeout and then allowed him to continue ministry. No external investigation. No report to authorities. No accountability structure beyond people loyal to him. Second, the financial incentives. Megachurches are multi-million-dollar enterprises. Gateway Church alone had an estimated annual budget of over $100 million. When your church is that large, protecting the institution becomes protecting jobs, programs, buildings, and the livelihoods of hundreds of staff members. Pete Singer, executive director of Grace, Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment, explained, "When it comes down to it, protecting the organization means that they aren't focusing on the harm that has been caused to the victim or survivor." Third, the culture of celebrity. Megachurch pastors become brands unto themselves. They write best-selling books. They speak at conferences. They build massive personal platforms. This celebrity status creates a dangerous dynamic where pastors are treated as untouchable and where questioning them is framed as attacking God's anointed. Fourth, the lack of transparency. Unlike secular nonprofits, churches don't file financial disclosure forms. Megachurch finances are often closely guarded secrets. Pastor salaries, operational expenses, and financial arrangements remain hidden from congregations who fund them. Fifth, the theology of success. The church growth movement created metrics for success based on numbers: attendance, baptisms, budgets. When growth becomes the primary indicator of God's blessing, moral and theological concerns become secondary. A growing church must be blessed by God, the logic goes, so the pastor must be doing something right. Sixth, the exploitation of grace. When pastors are caught in misconduct, churches often invoke Christian teachings about grace, forgiveness, and restoration in ways that protect leaders while ignoring victims. The accused pastor becomes the focus of compassion while victims are pressured to forgive and move on. One Dallas pastor who spoke anonymously said the culture embraced fame instead of faithfulness, and this was setting people up for failure. The investigation revealed that what's happening in megachurches isn't random moral failure. It's the predictable result of systems designed to accumulate power, resist accountability, and prioritize growth over health. Rachel attended Gateway Church for 12 years. She volunteered in children's ministry, served on mission trips, and gave generously. When Robert Morris resigned, she felt like her spiritual foundation had been pulled out from under her. "I brought my kids to that church," she told me. "I trusted that it was a safe place. I listened to Morris preach about holiness and integrity every Sunday. And the whole time, he and the leaders who knew about his past were lying to us." Rachel left Gateway and hasn't attended church since. "I don't know if I can trust pastors anymore. If someone like Robert Morris can fool that many people for that long, how do I know it's not happening everywhere? How do I know which pastors are real and which ones are just good performers?" Daniel was on staff at a megachurch in Texas when his senior pastor was fired for financial misconduct. Daniel had dedicated his career to ministry, leaving a higher-paying job to serve the church. When the scandal broke, Daniel watched the church prioritize protecting the institution over supporting staff who had been misled. "We were told to keep quiet, to not talk to media, to present a unified front. Meanwhile, my entire understanding of ministry was collapsing. I had sacrificed for this place, believed in this pastor, and it was all built on a lie." Daniel left vocational ministry entirely. He now works in nonprofit management and attends a small church where he knows the pastor personally. "I'll never work at a megachurch again. The celebrity pastor model is toxic. It creates conditions where abuse thrives and where people like me who genuinely wanted to serve Jesus become collateral damage." Stephanie was sexually harassed by a megachurch pastor in her 20s. When she reported it to church leadership, she was told the pastor had struggled with boundaries, but that he was getting help. She was asked not to talk about it publicly because it would harm the church's witness. "They cared more about protecting his reputation and the church's reputation than they cared about what he did to me," Stephanie said. "When I finally left that church, other women started contacting me with similar stories. We realized he'd been doing this for years and leadership knew. They just kept moving him around and covering it up. Stephanie now advocates for abuse survivors in church contexts. The megachurch model creates perfect conditions for abuse because power is centralized, accountability is minimal, and protecting the brand becomes more important than protecting people. Until that changes, this will keep happening. Marcus grew up attending a megachurch and wanted to be a pastor. He went to Bible college, interned at his home church, and planned to join the pastoral staff. Then he watched his senior pastor resign after a scandal, saw how the church handled it, and reconsidered everything. I realized that megachurches operate more like corporations than churches. Success is measured by attendance and budget. Pastors are evaluated like CEOs. The whole model is about scaling and growing, not about actual spiritual formation. I didn't sign up to be a religious CEO. I wanted to be a shepherd, so I left. Marcus now leads a small house church of about 30 people. We don't have a building or a budget. We don't have programs or staff, but we have genuine community, and everyone knows each other, and nobody's on a pedestal. It's what church was supposed to be before we turned it into an industry. The turning point that accelerated the megachurch collapse wasn't a single event. It was COVID-19 combined with the explosion of social media activism and the Me Too movement creating perfect conditions for hidden abuse to become public. COVID disrupted megachurch operations in ways that exposed their fragility. When campuses closed and services moved online, many discovered that attendance was more about habit and social performance than spiritual commitment. When those habits were disrupted, thousands never returned. Megachurches that had invested millions in facilities suddenly found themselves with massive overhead and declining revenue. Some made controversial decisions about whether to comply with public health guidelines, alienating members who disagreed. Churches became flashpoints in culture war debates, and many people decided the fight wasn't worth it. But the real turning point was the rise of survivor-led activism and investigative journalism focused on church abuse. Platforms like the Wartburg Watch, Julie Roy's reports, and independent bloggers began documenting abuse and cover-ups that churches had successfully hidden for decades. Cindy Clemishier's public accusation against Robert Morris in June 2024 came through the Wartburg Watch. Without that platform, her story might have remained hidden. Without social media amplifying it, Gateway Church might have contained the damage. But in 2024, victims have voices, platforms, and audiences. When Clemishier spoke, thousands listened. Other victims found courage to come forward. Journalists investigated. Churches could no longer control the narrative. The summer of 2024 became the moment when the dam broke. When the accumulated scandals, the COVID disruptions, and the empowered survivor movement converged to reveal what had been true all along. The megachurch model was fundamentally broken. As one Dallas pastor said, "It's a domino effect. One courageous survivor comes forward, and it communicates to others that they're not alone. And suddenly, what had been hidden in darkness comes into light." The turning point was realizing we could no longer look away. The death of the megachurch doesn't mean large churches will cease to exist. It means the celebrity pastor model that defined evangelical Christianity for 40 years is ending, and what replaces it will look dramatically different. First, we'll see continued implosions of existing megachurches as more scandals surface and as the structural problems of the model become undeniable. The Dallas summer of 2024 won't be the last wave of resignations. It's the beginning of a reckoning that will continue for years. Second, churches that survive will need to implement radical structural changes. External accountability, financial transparency, distributed leadership, protection for whistleblowers, and policies that prevent the accumulation of unchecked pastoral power. The churches that refuse to change will collapse. The ones that adapt quickly will survive in diminished form. Third, we'll see the rise of alternative church models. House churches, micro-churches, networks of smaller congregations, and hybrid online/in-person communities. Young Christians especially are rejecting the megachurch model and seeking authentic community in smaller contexts where celebrity culture can't take root. Fourth, there will be a theological reckoning about what success means. The church growth metrics that dominated for 40 years, attendance, budgets, buildings, will be replaced by metrics that prioritize health, discipleship, community, and faithfulness. The question won't be, how big is your church? But, how deep is your formation? Fifth, we'll see the end of the celebrity pastor as cultural influencer. The platform that allowed pastors like Rick Warren and Joel Osteen to become household names is fragmenting. Future church leaders will need to earn trust through character and service, not through marketing and charisma. Sixth, denominational structures may experience a resurgence as independent megachurches collapse and people recognize the need for external accountability. The very structures megachurches rejected as limiting could become essential for preventing future abuse. Seventh, the line between church and business will need clearer definition. Megachurches that operate like corporations will face increasing scrutiny and potentially even legal reforms requiring financial disclosure. The tax-exempt status that protected church finances from transparency may not survive in its current form. Eighth, victim advocacy will become central to church reform. Organizations like Grace and attorneys like Michelle Simpson-Tuggle will play crucial roles in forcing institutional change. Churches that resist will face legal consequences and public exposure. What most people don't realize is that the death of the megachurch is actually an opportunity to return to something closer to what Jesus intended, an opportunity to build communities based on mutual accountability rather than celebrity worship, an opportunity to prioritize people over programs and presence over platform. The megachurch era is ending. Whether what comes next is better depends on whether we learn from what went wrong. I think about Cindy Clemisher standing before that Texas House Committee in October 2024, finally telling her story after 40 years of silence. She was 12 when a pastor she trusted molested her. She was told never to speak about it because it would ruin everything. And for decades, she stayed silent while Robert Morris built one of the largest churches in America. Until she didn't stay silent anymore. Until she found the courage to speak. And when she spoke, everything changed. The death of the megachurch isn't ultimately about buildings closing or pastors resigning or budgets shrinking. It's about something much more fundamental. It's about whether we're willing to tell the truth. For 40 years, American evangelicalism built an empire on a lie. The lie that bigger is better. That success equals God's blessing. That charismatic leaders should be trusted without accountability. That growth matters more than health. That protecting institutions is more important than protecting people. And millions of us believed it. We attended those churches, we bought those books, we watched those broadcasts. We wanted to believe that Christianity could be successful and influential and powerful. We wanted to believe our pastors were heroes. But Jesus never called us to build empires. He called us to be faithful. He never called us to create celebrities. He called us to be servants. He never measured success by attendance and budgets. He measured faithfulness by love, by service, by sacrifice. Maybe the death of the megachurch is actually resurrection in disguise. Maybe God is tearing down what we built so something truer, something smaller, something more like Jesus can emerge. I don't know what the American church will look like in 20 years. But I know this, it won't be built on celebrity pastors and massive campuses and slick marketing. Can't be. That model is dying, and it should die. What comes next needs to be built on truth, on accountability, on communities small enough that everyone knows everyone's name, on leadership that serves rather than commands, on transparency rather than secrecy, on protection of the vulnerable rather than protection of the powerful. The megachurch era is ending, and maybe that's not something to mourn. Maybe it's something to thank God for. Because the church Jesus is building doesn't need a stage or a spotlight or a celebrity pastor. It just needs faithful people willing to tell the truth, love their neighbors, and follow Jesus wherever he leads. Even if it's to something small, even if it's to something humble, even if it looks nothing like what we thought success should be. Subscribe to Christian Faith Archive. Because the megachurch may be dying, but the church Jesus promised to build will never fail.